The question is like this. Obtain the overall transfer function of the block diagram shown below by reduction technique. Right. Now what we have? First we have RS as the input, G1, G2 and G3 are the three forward blocks and H1 and H2 are the reverse block or the feedback block what we have. Now seeing to this, I shall number this as 1 summing point, first summing point, this is the second summing point and this is the third summing point here, and then we have one first takeoff point and second takeoff point, here is third takeoff point. So to have easy, I have done this one. Now what are the steps to be followed while we solve the block diagram reduction problem? First, check whether we have the blocks in series. Now checking with this, coming to this line, first line here. Now these two blocks, that is G1 and G2 are not in series or neither in parallel, and G1 and G3 are not in series, neither it is in parallel here. Right, and then check for a simple feedback. Feedback we have H1 and H2. There are two feedback H1 and H2. Checking these two blocks cannot be taken as a simple feedback loop here. Right. Now next step number 4 is to check whether to shift the takeoff point towards right or summing point towards left. Right, special or Thor. Right. But before going to that, we can simplify this one. See here with this, that is the summing point 2 and 3. In between these two summing point, that is summing point 2 and 3, there is no block which is present in between these two summing point. Right. So what I'll do, I'll merge these two blocks here, or else I'll combine the summing point 2 and summing point 3 here. Right. So what I can find here is, first I have the input as R of S. This is the input here. Sorry. R of S is the input here. We have the summing point 1 with positive input. Then next is G1 here. We have the summing point 2 here, summing point 2 here. This is the summing point 1 here. Then what I have G2 here. Then the takeoff point 2 here, and this I'll write it below. This is H1. What I have done, I'll be merging these two blocks, that is summing point, that is summing point 2 and summing point 3 here. So this becomes the takeoff point 2 and clubs with the summing point 3 here. This is positive here and this is 3. 2 and 3 is been merged here. Right. Then what I have here, one more takeoff point is there, that is takeoff point number 1, that is G3 here, that comes and merges with the summing point 2 with positive input here. This is also positive here. Shit. We have this block G3 and comes and merges with the summing point 2 here. Now 2 and 3 is been merged here or combined here. Both 2 and 3 is been combined. Now we are left out with the takeoff point 3 here. So this is the takeoff point 3 that has H2 is the feedback block what we have, that comes and combines with the summing point number 1 here with a negative feedback. What I have done, I have just clubbed or combined these two summing points. Summing point 2 and 3 is been combined. So whatever input is there for 3, that input will be there for 2. Let us see, H1 is the input for 3 here, block number summing point 3 here. See, H1 is the summing point 3. This is been used here, that is H1 is been used here like this. Right here H1 is then used for the block number 3 here. Similarly, G3 is been clubbed for block number 3. G3 is been clubbed for block number 3 here. Right. Apart from that, 2 and 3 is been clubbed here. 2 and 3 is been clubbed here. Right. Now what I'll do, now checking with these two, first check whether we have any blocks in series or any blocks in parallel here. Checking with these two blocks, here G1 and G2 here. Now these two blocks are now in parallel here. These two blocks are now in parallel. So reduce this one first. Input we have is R of S. R of S is the input. This is the summing point 1. And when the blocks are in parallel, what we are supposed to do? We need to add up that. Right. That is G1 plus G3 here. G1 plus G3 is the summing point here. Sorry, these two blocks are in parallel now. Right. And we have the summing point 2 here. Then we have G2 here. And the output C of S. Right. This is now what we have. This is the feedback loop, that is H1. That is clubbed with this summing point positive. And then we have one more feedback loop, that is H2, from where after this block, that is G2. After G2 we have the feedback loop here, and it comes and connects with the summing point number 1 here with negative feedback here. Right. Now after this, again follow the steps. Check whether we have the blocks in series. No, we don't have any blocks in series. Check whether the blocks are in parallel. No, we don't have any blocks in parallel. Check for a simple feedback loop or minor feedback loop. See here what we have, G2 H1, this becomes a minor feedback loop. So what we are supposed to do? Now we shall reduce this minor feedback loop here. This is the input R of S and the blocks G1 plus G3 here. Then instead of this, what we are supposed to do is, for simple feedback loop, the formula is G divided by 1 minus GH. When we have the positive feedback, then the sign will be negative here. Right. When we have the negative feedback, in the denominator the sign will be positive. So instead of G, what we have G2 here. G2 divided by 1 minus G2 H1. G2 H1. This is the simple feedback loop. And output we have is C of S. And apart from this, we have the block, that is feedback loop here, that is H2 is the feedback what we have with negative feedback loop. this is negative, positive. Right. Now, what we are supposed to do, again follow the steps. First check whether the blocks are in series. Yes, we do have these two blocks are in series now. These two blocks are in now series here. So what I am supposed to do, when blocks are in series, we need to multiply those two blocks there. Right. So this becomes G1 plus G3 into G2 divided by 1 minus G2 H2 here. And we have the input as R of S with the summing point and output as C of S, and we have the feedback, that is H2. The feedback here is the negative feedback here. Right. Now we shall solve this block which is there inside the brackets. So here this becomes G1 G2 plus G2 G3 whole divided by 1 minus G2 H2 here. Output here is C of S, input here is R of S with a summing point. Input here is R of S. And one more we have is the feedback, that is H2. We have here is the negative feedback here and here is positive. Right. Now what we are supposed to do, we need to solve for a simple feedback loop here. What is the formula we have? G divided by 1 plus GH. This positive sign should be taken when we have the negative feedback here. Positive sign should be taken when we have the negative sign here. Right. So what is G here? G is nothing but this block. This block is G here. And what is H? H is nothing but H2 here. H is nothing but H2 here. Right. Now we shall solve. Directly I'll write the transfer function, that is C of S divided by R of S here, which is equals to, here in the numerator G is what? G1 G2 plus G2 G3 divided by 1 minus G2 H2 whole divided by 1 plus G here is what? G1 G2 plus G2 G3 divided by 1 minus G2 H2 here into H. H is what? H2 here. H is H2 here. Right. Now we shall solve this further. I'll write the numerator as it is. G1 G2 plus G2 G3 divided by 1 minus G2 H2 whole divided by, I'll take LCM, it is 1 minus G2 H2 plus, I'll multiply H2 inside this, that is G1 G2 H2 plus G2 G3 H2 whole divided by 1 minus G2 H2 here. So these two will get cancels out. Remaining is the transfer function C of S by R of S here. So the transfer function C of S divided by R of S is equals to G1 G2 plus G2 G3 divided by 1 minus G2 H2 plus G1 G2 H2 plus G2 G3 H2. This is the transfer function for the given block diagram here.